Society keeps preaching that everyone deserves a second chance. But in a world filled with gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional abuse, does giving someone another chance really show compassion? Or does it simply make you their victim? Twice, we glorify forgiveness, but rarely talk about the price. In modern culture, choosing boundaries is often labeled as cold or selfish. But is it really selfish to protect your peace from people who knew they were breaking you? We're told kindness is about tolerance. But in reality, kindness without self-respect is emotional slavery. In relationships, at work, even in family, how often do we confuse exploitation with love just because we're afraid of saying no? Welcome to StoicCraft, a channel where ancient Stoic wisdom meets the challenges of modern life. Here we don't sugarcoat the truth. We show you how to protect your peace, build unshakable self-respect, and rise above manipulation with clarity and strength. They didn't stumble by accident, they aimed with precision. They didn't love carelessly, they destroyed deliberately. And now you're standing at a crossroads, not between forgiveness and revenge, but between self-respect and self-abandonment. This isn't about clinging to a grudge. It's about drawing a boundary. Because what they did wasn't a mistake, It wasn't a moment of weakness or an emotional slip. It was a choice, a calculated betrayal, a decision they made fully aware of the cost to you. Yet here you are, wondering if giving them another chance makes you kind, or if cutting them off makes you cruel. Let's be clear, letting them back in doesn't prove kindness. It only makes you vulnerable again. They've already shown you what they do when they regain access. And that's why emotional intelligence is not about tolerating everyone. It's about recognizing intent, enforcing psychological boundaries, and refusing to apologize for protecting your peace. If they harmed you intentionally, then giving them a second chance is not compassion, it's self-betrayal. Society quietly whispers a dangerous lie, that everyone deserves a second chance. But let's be honest, not every wound is accidental. Not every injury comes from ignorance or immaturity. Some people knew exactly what they were doing when they hurt you, and they still chose to do it. They studied your softness, your loyalty, your patience, and they weaponized it. That's not a mistake, that's strategy. The psychology of intentional harm. People don't accidentally lie multiple times. They don't accidentally gaslight you until you doubt your own memory. They don't accidentally betray your trust. With perfect timing and deliberate manipulation, this is premeditated emotional abuse. And here's the catch. Once they're caught, they often disguise it as a misunderstanding. They want a reset. They want access again. But emotional intelligence means seeing the difference. Regret says, I'm sorry I got caught. Remorse says, I'm sorry I hurt you. One leads to change. The other leads to repetition. Too many people confuse kindness with gullibility, compassion with compliance. But when you allow someone who has already shown you their true character to re-enter your life unchecked, you're not practicing mercy, you're betraying your own wisdom. The Stoics warned us of this. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. But sometimes it's not your imagination. Sometimes the enemy wears a familiar face and speaks in gentle tones. You don't need to overanalyze whether it was deliberate. You felt the intent. You saw the patterns. Don't let guilt override the truth. There's a difference between a mistake and a pattern. Anyone can slip once a harsh word in anger, a forgotten promise, a lapse in judgment. But when the behavior becomes predictable, when every cycle ends in your pain and their excuses, that's not a mistake. That's a pattern. And patterns reveal priorities. If someone consistently chooses what benefits them at your expense, they're not confused. They're committed to themselves, and you need to be equally committed to your peace. Emotional pain isn't a curse. It's a signal. Pain is information. It's your inner voice saying, this isn't right. This isn't safe. This isn't love. Yet so many of us ignore that signal because of hope. We hope they'll change. We hope it's just a phase. We hope love can repair what broken character destroyed. But hope without boundaries becomes self-harm. You were not put here to be someone's emotional punching bag in the name of forgiveness. Self-worth never begs for re-entry. True self-worth says, I don't hate you. I just love myself more. And that doesn't require anger, revenge, or a dramatic exit. It requires clarity. Because once you've seen someone's true nature, choosing them again is consciously choosing your own destruction. Emotional maturity isn't measured by how much you can endure. It's measured by what you refuse to allow any longer. And when someone damages you on purpose, your responsibility isn't to save them, it's to protect yourself. Detachment isn't cruelty. It's survival. Cutting someone off after intentional harm isn't cold. It's controlled. It's the quiet refusal to keep playing a role in your own suffering. It's the moment you stop giving CPR to relationships that have long been dead. You're not abandoning them, you're choosing yourself. And that is the highest form of emotional intelligence. Don't confuse their charm for change. Don't confuse their tears for transformation. Don't confuse their need for your energy as proof of love. They had access to your soul and still chose harm. They had the chance to protect your trust and still chose betrayal. Now it's your turn to choose, and this time choose wisely. Choose peace. Choose clarity. Choose self-respect over second chances. You can forgive someone and still never let them back in. That's not bitterness, that's clarity. Forgiveness is a personal act, a sacred release, a spiritual cleansing that frees you from the emotional weight of what they did. But forgiveness is not an invitation to return. It is not reconciliation. It is liberation, because many misunderstand forgiveness. They think it means you've forgotten, that you've healed enough to tolerate their presence again, that your peace is proof they deserve another chance. But here's the truth. Forgiveness is for your peace, not for their return. Emotional intelligence means forgiving without repeating the cycle. Let's be absolutely clear. Holding on to resentment is poison. It corrodes your soul, clouds your judgment, and steals your clarity. But equally toxic is welcoming back the very energy that once fractured you. Emotional intelligence isn't only about letting go, it's also about learning the lesson. If you forgive without boundaries, you become a playground for manipulation. If you heal but fail to protect what's been healed, you leave the door wide open for harm to return that. So forgive, yes, but forgive with discernment. Let the wound close, but don't reopen the battlefield. Forgiveness is a spiritual discipline, not an emotional weakness. It isn't softness, it isn't passivity, and it certainly isn't about letting someone off the hook. True forgiveness is about releasing yourself from the hook of revenge, obsession, and endless what-ifs. When you forgive, you're not declaring that what they did was acceptable. You're saying, I refuse to let your actions define my mind or my peace. You're breaking spiritual ties, cleansing poison from your system, reclaiming inner peace without demanding repayment from someone who is spiritually bankrupt. That's not weakness, that's power. And true power is when your peace no longer depends on anyone's apology. Just because you've healed doesn't mean they've changed. One of the most dangerous traps in healing is assuming that because you've evolved, they must have as well. You begin to romanticize their potential, telling yourself, maybe this time will be different. But pause and ask, has their behavior truly changed? Have they taken full responsibility, not just uttered sorry, but shown consistent transformation through actions? If the answer is no, then your healing should never become their shortcut back into your life. You don't owe anyone access just because you've found inner peace. In fact, boundaries after forgiveness are the purest form of self-respect. The Stoics believed in emotional mastery, and nothing reflects mastery more than setting boundaries without guilt. Seneca reminded us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Wasting time on people who've already proven their disregard for your value isn't noble, it's self-neglect. Yes, you can bless someone from afar. You can wish them healing without reopening the door. You can say, I forgive you, without saying, come back. That is what high self-worth looks like in action, a soft heart paired with a firm boundary. Because forgiveness without discernment isn't virtue. It's an invitation for more pain dots. So let's be honest. How many times have you forgiven someone only to watch the same destructive cycle repeat itself? How many times have you sacrificed your own peace in the belief that one more chance would finally make it right? At some point, it's no longer about them, it's about you. The impulse to keep handing out chances isn't rooted in love. It's rooted in the hope that they'll finally become the person you once imagined them to be. But hope is not a relationship strategy. And love without boundaries isn't noble, it's reckless. Forgiveness is meant to be the final chapter of a wound. Reopening that chapter doesn't rewrite the story, it just reopens the scar. The healthier alternative is to stand firm in your truth. I've made peace with the past, but I'm not revisiting it. I wish you well from afar. You're forgiven, but you're no longer welcome. This kind of boundary isn't about revenge, it's about recovery. You don't need to justify your decision to anyone. Silence often says what explanations cannot. And sometimes the most spiritual act you can perform is to walk away without ever looking back. Forgive boldly, yes, but never forget what it cost you to become the version of yourself you are today. You didn't climb out of darkness only to hand the flashlight back to someone who once helped bury you. Your peace is sacred. Guard it like a fortress. Forgiveness must remain your freedom, not your downfall. Here's where the misunderstanding of kindness comes in. Many in this world confuse kindness with weakness. They think empathy makes you easy to manipulate. They assume that if you don't scream, threaten, or retaliate, then somehow you've lost. But the truth is this: kindness is not weakness. It is strength under complete control. It isn't the absence of power, it's the refusal to abuse it. The person who could retaliate but instead chooses discipline is not weak. In fact, They are dangerous in the most elegant way because they've mastered themselves. Emotional intelligence looks like calm in chaos, and yet people misinterpret this calm. They think that because you don't yell or beg, you must be fragile. They mistake your silence for submission. But in reality, emotional intelligence means you've outgrown the need to react to every provocation. You know when to walk away, not because you can't fight, but because you've realized it isn't worth your energy. Your calm doesn't mean you're numb. It means you've trained yourself not to bleed for people who once stabbed you. You're no longer fighting for approval. You're protecting your peace like a warrior wielding a spiritual sword. This is the Stoic power of non-reactivity. The Stoics taught us that true strength is rooted in restraint, not suppression, but sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius said, "If someone does wrong, it is their own loss. You lose nothing by refusing to be dragged into their chaos." Your kindness, then, isn't weakness, it's psychological mastery. It's refusing to let the storm outside dictate the weather within. You've outgrown reactive living. You no longer mirror other people's energy, you guard your own. Because kindness doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. It means refusing to stoop to the level of those who thrive on drama. Kindness with boundaries is the ultimate form of power. And let's be clear, kindness without boundaries isn't virtue, it's vulnerability. It's allowing emotional vampires to drink from your soul and then labeling it compassion. You are allowed to be kind and still say no. You are allowed to be compassionate and still walk away. You are allowed to forgive and still block someone from your life forever. Because if your kindness costs you your peace, your self-respect, or your mental clarity, then it's no longer kindness, it's self-neglect. The abuser's favorite lie is simple: you're too nice. Toxic people feed on your kindness and twist it into a weapon. They tell you you're too sensitive, too soft, too good for this world. That's not a compliment, it's a warning sign. What they're really saying is, I know I can hurt you, and you'll still stay. I know I can cross your boundaries, and you'll find a way to excuse it. I know your empathy will protect me more than it protects you, but that version of you no longer exists. You've grown. You've evolved. Now you understand that kindness without self-respect is nothing more than emotional slavery. Quiet confidence, you've discovered, is far more powerful than loud rage. People often think power must be loud, that you need to shout, argue, or destroy to prove yourself. But the highest level of confidence doesn't argue, doesn't explain, doesn't beg. It simply walks with posture, with purpose, with presence. And that's what terrifies manipulators the most. You don't need to win anymore. You've already won by removing them from your space. You reclaim your power when you stop seeking their validation. Kindness with teeth is still kindness. Kindness can have standards. It can have rules. It can wear armor. You are not here to be anyone's emotional sponge. You are not here to explain your boundaries until someone finally chooses to respect them. You are kind not because others deserve it, but because you refuse to become like them. But you are also clear. And clarity is an act of kindness toward yourself. Choosing grace does not make you weak. Choosing empathy does not make you naive. Letting go instead of lashing out does not make you soft. It makes you wise. It makes you grounded. It means you are no longer reacting out of trauma. You are responding from a place of power. When your kindness is no longer available to those who abused it, that isn't revenge, it's evolution. You may think you need closure, but what you truly crave is validation. You want them to admit they were wrong, to explain why they hurt you, to acknowledge that what they did broke something sacred inside of you. That desire is human, but it's also a trap, because people who harm you intentionally don't give closure. They give confusion. They vanish. They gaslight. They rewrite the story to cast you as the villain. And when you search through the ruins they left behind hoping for clarity, you don't find peace, you find deeper torment. Emotional intelligence means knowing when to let silence speak for you. The truth is this: closure doesn't come from their apology. It comes from your decision to stop waiting for one. People who deliberately damage you aren't interested in making amends. They're interested in maintaining control through your questions, through your confusion, through your longing. The longer you wait for closure, the longer they own pieces of your peace. Emotional intelligence is recognizing that the conversation is already over even if they never gave you the courtesy of a goodbye. Let go of the fantasy of a satisfying ending. Stories and movies condition us to expect neat resolutions, the apology, the tears, the redemption arc. But real life is far messier. Real closure isn't a shared moment. It's a private revolution inside your soul. It's waking up one morning and saying, I don't need answers anymore. I just need peace. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop chasing closure is the moment healing begins. Their silence is an answer. Sometimes the lack of response is the response. Sometimes the disappearing act is itself the closure. You don't need them to admit they were wrong there. Actions already revealed everything. They didn't forget you. They chose not to face you. They weren't confused. They calculated what they did and moved on. And the more you chase why, the deeper you fall into their emotional game, because closure, when weaponized, becomes manipulation. And when you're still waiting for closure, you're often disguising self-betrayal. Let's be brutally honest. Sometimes seeking closure is just another way of saying, I still want them to care. I still want to hold on. I still haven't accepted that they chose to hurt me. Here's the truth. If they were capable of giving closure, they never would have inflicted the kind of wound that required it. Every time you text, every time you check their social media, every time you hope they'll reach out, you're not healing. You're reopening the wound. That's not recovery, that's betrayal of yourself in disguise. True closure is self-created. You build closure when you stop waiting for theirs. You find peace when you stop depending on them. You look at what happened. You accept what it cost. You grieve the version of yourself that tolerated it, and then you rise beyond it. You write your own ending. You choose your own peace, and you tell yourself, they don't have the right to define my worth. Their silence will not be louder than my healing. Their absence is no longer a mystery, it's a message. Spiritual discipline means you walk without closure. Stoicism teaches us this timeless truth. You are not owed anything, not even an apology. The universe does not guarantee resolution. What it offers instead is perspective. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Epictetus said, so you walk forward with dignity, with clarity, with self-respect. Not because everything makes sense, but because you no longer need it to. Closure is not a negotiation. It's not a group effort. It's a decision you make alone. I refuse to stay stuck in a chapter someone else ended without my permission. You reclaim your power not by finishing the conversation, but by ending the attachment. You don't need closure to heal. You need truth. And the truth is simple. They are not who you thought they were. Stop waiting for them to come back and make things right, because if they could, they already would have. The closure you've been searching for is this. You're still standing, you're still healing, and you're no longer handing your peace back to those who burned it the first time. That is closure. Forgiveness is noble, yes, but access is a privilege. Not everyone deserves it. Some people didn't just make a mistake. They made a conscious choice. They looked you in the eyes, recognized your worth, and decided to betray it anyway. And now they want a second chance, another opening, another seat at the table they flipped before. But emotional intelligence requires you to ask the harder question. Are they truly sorry, or are they just sorry they lost access to you? Not everyone deserves to return. We live in a culture that glorifies second chances, that equates giving the benefit of the doubt with being morally good. But what if that isn't true? What if, in some cases, a second chance is simply another opportunity for destruction? Let's be clear. Forgiveness is about you. Access is about them. You can forgive someone fully in your heart and still never allow them near your peace again. That isn't cruelty, it's protection. A violated trust once is a warning. Twice, it's a pattern. The third time? That's not fate. That's a lesson you've refused to learn. And the danger of second chances lies in what it silently teaches your subconscious. That your worth is negotiable. That betrayal can be excused if packaged in an apology. That your boundaries don't really matter. That isn't grace. That's self-abandonment disguised as compassion. Apologies are easy. Change is rare. Anyone can say, "I'm sorry," especially when they've lost their supply, when the weight of consequences makes them uncomfortable. But words mean nothing when the damage was intentional. Ask yourself, have they owned their actions without excuses? Have they taken full responsibility for the impact, not just the act? Have they shown change through consistent, uncomfortable self-work? If the answer is no, then giving them another chance isn't love. It's a vote against yourself. Spiritual discipline is knowing when to let go. It's a quiet strength, a clarity that says, "You showed me who you are the first time. I'd be a fool to pretend otherwise the second." It's refusing to keep giving your energy to those who never protected it. It's the choice to value your peace over their guilt trips. To understand that closure, redemption, and reconciliation do not always arrive as a package deal. Sometimes healing requires permanent separation, even from those you once loved. Because second chances don't just risk hurting you again, they risk stealing your future. The real danger of offering someone another chance isn't only the pain of being cut again, it's the cost in time, in energy, in opportunity. Every minute wasted trying to resuscitate a dead connection is a minute stolen from your growth. Every ounce of effort spent proving your worth is energy ripped away from the truth. You never had to prove it in the first place. And every time you put their comfort above your evolution, you step further away from who you were meant to become. This is your moment to realize that your life is too valuable to be paused for someone else's growth curve. Let the first time be the last time. You're not cruel for closing the door. You're not heartless for enforcing distance. You are not unkind for protecting yourself from repeated harm. You are simply applying what you've learned. That is maturity. In motion. So let the first time be the last time. Let their memory be your teacher. Let your decision be your declaration. I am no longer available for people who made the choice to break me, because second chances are not always redemption. Sometimes they're just replays of the same nightmare wearing a different disguise. You are not here to live in loops. You are here to rise, to evolve, to protect your future as though it matters, because it does. So when someone harms you intentionally, don't hand them another weapon under the banner of forgiveness. Close the chapter. Lock the door. Build a life so abundant they wouldn't even recognize the version of you they once tried to destroy. And remember this, when someone damages you intentionally, they don't always walk away. Sometimes they stay, but not because they love you. They stay to keep control. And when you start to pull away, they don't apologize, they manipulate. They weaponize your empathy, twist your compassion into a leash, and before you even realize it, you're apologizing for having boundaries. They spin the guilt narrative. You're giving up on me. The moment you draw a line, they rewrite the story. Suddenly you're the problem, you're cold, you're too sensitive. You're the one destroying everything you've built together. They'll say things like, I know I messed up, but can't you see I'm trying? You're not perfect either. I just wish you'd fight for us the way I'm fighting for you. But look closely at the tactic. They're not taking responsibility. They're shaming you for protecting yourself. That's not remorse, it's manipulation wrapped in sentimental words. And if your emotional intelligence isn't sharp, you might mistake guilt tripping for love. And when they take it even further, they flip the script entirely. They put on the victim's mask. You hurt me by leaving. Suddenly they're not the abuser, they're the abandoned. Suddenly, they're no longer the abuser, they're the victim. They cry. They reminisce. They whisper lines like, I opened up to you, and now you're abandoning me. I've never felt this way before, and now you're walking away. You said you'd always be there for me. But let's be clear, pain doesn't make someone innocent. Tears don't erase the damage they caused. This isn't healing, it's reverse blame. It's a tactic designed to keep you stuck. Because if they can convince you that leaving them is the real betrayal, you'll stay not out of love, but to avoid feeling like the bad person. But staying in pain just to escape guilt isn't love. It's emotional self-sacrifice. Then comes the breadcrumbing. Just as you prepare to close the door, they dangle promises. I'll change. Let's start over. I can't lose you. They say just enough to keep hope alive, but never enough to actually do the work. That's breadcrumbing, a manipulation tactic where crumbs of affection keep you emotionally tethered. They don't want to rebuild. They want to reset the game so they can play it longer. Spiritual discipline means walking away without permission. And here's where your self-worth is truly tested. Because people who damage you intentionally rarely release you willingly. They don't take accountability. They prefer to keep you emotionally obligated, which is why you must stop waiting for their blessing, stop waiting for closure, for understanding, for mutual release. Your freedom doesn't depend on their validation. It depends on your decision. Spiritual discipline means walking away without applause, letting go without needing to be seen, closing the door without needing them to understand why. Because true peace doesn't come from their clarity. It comes from your courage. They'll weaponize history against you. They'll remind you of how long you've known each other, the laughter, the intimacy, the trauma you shared. They'll ask, so you're just going to throw all of this away after everything we've been through? But let's be honest. If history alone was enough to justify their place in your life, it would have protected the relationship. Shared time doesn't equal shared values. Memories don't equal respect. The past doesn't give them a free pass to violate your present. Emotional intelligence means calling the manipulation what it is. Guilt tripping isn't love. Breadcrumbing isn't progress. Crying after destruction isn't accountability. And a long history doesn't excuse repeated harm. The moment you name it, you reclaim your clarity. You see through the fog. You stand in your power. You realize, I don't need to prove my kindness by tolerating manipulation. You don't owe anyone emotional debt. Just because they're not finished using you doesn't mean you owe them more of your time. You are allowed to walk away, even if they're still confused, even if they call you cruel, even if they swear they're changing. Because real growth doesn't beg for access. It respects boundaries. It understands no. It doesn't twist your silence into punishment or your peace into betrayal. You don't owe anyone your continued suffering just because they regret causing it. And you don't have to prove anything to someone who saw your worth and still chose. To break it, the manipulation ends the moment you decide. This isn't about being nice. This is about being free. Toxic people expect noise. They expect you to react, to scream, to beg, to justify your pain just to be heard. But when you give them nothing, no anger, no explanations, no access, you activate the one thing they cannot endure: silence. Because silence isn't empty. Silence is power. In the presence of your silence, their mask begins to crack. Silence denies them control. For toxic people, conflict is currency. They thrive on drama. They survive on chaos. They provoke just to get a reaction. Because the moment you react, they win. If you scream, they call you unstable. If you explain, they twist your words. If you defend yourself, they accuse you of guilt. But silence starves the monster they built their identity on. You're no longer fuel. You're no longer supply. You've become a mirror too clear for them to face. And that terrifies them. This is emotional intelligence in action, knowing when to say nothing. And silence is not passivity. It's strategy. It's deliberate restraint. It's the quiet but unshakable statement. I don't owe you my energy. I don't need to prove myself anymore. You don't need the last word. You don't need to win the argument. Because your silence already said everything they refused to hear. It strips away their illusions. Toxic people live off projection. And they need you to play a role, the villain, the weak one, the overreactor. They need your words to complete their story. But silence gives them nothing. Nothing to twist, nothing to project, nothing to control. And in that void, they're forced to face themselves, and that is their greatest fear. Silence leaves them trapped with their own thoughts, their own guilt. They can't twist your quiet into a lie, can't bend your stillness into blame. With no one left to deflect on to, they finally have to face themselves, and that terrifies them. This is what spiritual discipline looks like, peace without performance. In a world addicted to reaction, peace itself becomes an act of rebellion. When you choose calm over chaos, detachment over drama, you're not just walking away, you're ascending. That's spiritual discipline. It doesn't need an audience, doesn't need applause. It quietly says, I don't chase closure, I become closure. You don't need to slam doors or stage dramatic exits, because silence is the final word. They will hear it in the echo of your absence. Silence cuts deeper than any argument, and that's why they keep reaching out, why they lurk on your social media, why they ask others about you. Your silence unsettles them. They expected chaos. They expected you to break down, to fall apart. Instead, you vanished, and in that void they feel the collapse of everything they once controlled. Your silence proves they've lost access to the version of you that tolerated disrespect. To them, that loss feels like psychological death. Silence reinforces your boundaries without a single fight. You don't have to explain why you walked away. You don't need to write long paragraphs or reopen old wounds. Silence simply says, you know what you did, and I know who I am now. No confrontation, no negotiations, no emotional debt left to collect. Just distance, just space. Just a door that stays shut, not out of hate, but out of respect for yourself. That is what inner peace sounds like. Nothing. And that quiet echoes, louder than any scream ever could. Silence transforms you, and it haunts them. They thought silence meant weakness, thought it meant you were broken, afraid, unsure. But time passed. You healed. You said nothing, and that silence became the loudest rejection of all. Because your quiet didn't just reject them, it invalidated the false version of themselves they had projected onto you. Silence isn't empty, it's filled with self-worth. When you go quiet, you're not disappearing, you're evolving in peace. No announcements, no drama, just discipline. That's high-performance mindset. That's psychological freedom. That's the move they never saw coming. So the next time someone tries to bait you, to drag you onto the battlefield they created, remember this: the loudest move you can make is no move at all. Let them spin. Let them talk. Let them drown in the silence you left behind. Because choosing silence doesn't mean you lost control, it means you reclaimed it. And here's where forgiveness enters again. Forgiveness is powerful, but it is not a free pass back into your life. Just because you've forgiven someone does not mean they've earned the right to stand next to you again. That's not bitterness, that's emotional intelligence. Forgiveness is internal. Reconnection is conditional. Forgiveness is what you do for yourself. It's how you release the poison, the resentment, the weight of the pain. It's a personal act of spiritual discipline, a vow that says, I will not carry your damage in my heart anymore. But reconnection, that's external, and it must be earned. It requires more than an apology. It requires accountability. It requires change. It requires consistent, demonstrated action, not occasional bursts of regret. Forgiveness is not emotional. Amnesia. People often say, if you truly forgave them, why are you still distant? Why don't you talk to them anymore? Why can't you just let it go? Let's be clear. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering clearly without reliving the pain. It's seeing the truth for what it is and still choosing peace, not denial. You are allowed to forgive someone and never trust them. Again, that isn't hate, that's wisdom. Because reconnection without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-betrayal. Reuniting with someone who hasn't done the work isn't noble, it's destructive. You don't prove your growth by tolerating old chaos again. You prove it by guarding your peace. Sometimes real growth means loving people from a safe distance. Forgiveness is for your soul, not for their comfort. Some people want your forgiveness not because they've changed, but because your silence makes them uneasy. They want to erase their guilt. They want to feel better about what they did without actually repairing it. But you are not responsible for soothing the conscience of someone who never owned their damage. Your forgiveness is not a favor to them, it's a gift to yourself. It's the release of a burden, not a reopening of the wound. You can let go without letting them back in. That is high-performance mindset in relationships. You let go not to welcome them back, but to stop renting them space in your mind. You no longer chase closure, you've become closure. You no longer explain your silence. You no longer justify your boundaries. You simply move on because your healing is not up for debate. True forgiveness is disciplined detachment. It means you've made peace with the past, but you're wise enough not to repeat it. You don't hold grudges, but you do hold standards, and that's what unsettles them most. They expected your forgiveness to come with access. Instead, you gave them closure. You gave them grace, not permission. Peace, not partnership. Healing, but no open door. That's the boundary they never saw coming, because your self-worth is not a second chance. They may apologize. They may cry. They may beg. But if their presence requires you to lower your standards again, to shrink yourself again, to walk on eggshells again, that isn't reconciliation, that's regression. You didn't climb this far, break old patterns, and rebuild yourself just to let someone walk back in with the same chaos dressed in a new mask. You didn't heal to play pretend. Your peace is sacred, protect it. The world will pressure you to be soft, to just move on, to keep the peace. But peace is not passive. Peace is protective. Peace is built on boundaries. So when you forgive, do it boldly, but with discernment. Let it go, but don't let it return. Not everyone deserves access to the healed version of you. And when they ask, why can't we go back to how things were? Your answer is simple. Because I'm no longer who I was when I allowed that. Forgiveness sets you free. Boundaries keep you free, and that is what they'll never understand. So let's strip away the illusion right now. They weren't confused. They weren't lost. They weren't simply going through something. They were calculating. They were deliberate. They knew exactly what they were doing when they hurt you. And how do you know this? Because they only do it to the people who won't fight back. Emotional intelligence requires facing the truth, not justifying the pain. It feels easier to believe they didn't mean it. Because if it wasn't intentional, then maybe you didn't waste your love. Maybe they're still redeemable. Maybe the story still has hope. But that isn't healing, it's denial dressed in empathy. True emotional intelligence means you stop protecting someone else's reputation at the cost of your own clarity. It means you stop gaslighting yourself with excuses. Maybe they didn't know better. Maybe it's just their trauma. Maybe I'm too sensitive. No, maybe they knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it anyway. Intentional harm often hides behind the mask of confusion. Ask yourself, did they know how to be kind when it benefited them? Did they show respect to others while turning cold with you? Did they know the rules of decency everywhere else except in your presence? That isn't confusion. That's selective cruelty. People know how to behave when it serves them. They know how to be kind when the spotlight is on. So when they choose to mistreat you in private, that's not an accident, that's character. They studied your soft spots. They found your insecurities. They noticed the moments when you put their needs above your own. And then they weaponized all of it. That isn't immaturity. That isn't trauma response. That's deliberate emotional manipulation. And it must be named for what it is. Without sugarcoating, spiritual discipline means calling betrayal what it is, not dressing it up as misunderstanding. The more spiritual you become, the more compassionate you may feel. But compassion is not permission. Forgiveness is not blindness. When someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, ignores your needs, and drains your spirit, your duty is not to excuse them. It's to protect your soul from further harm. That starts with seeing them as they truly are, not who you hoped they would be. Stop giving the benefit of the doubt to people who profit from your doubt. Notice the patterns. They only question your memory when it exposes their lies. They only call you dramatic when your emotions threaten their comfort. They only beg for peace when silence means escaping consequences. You're not crazy. You're not too emotional. You're not unforgiving. You're finally seeing clearly, and that clarity terrifies them. They didn't just hurt you by accident. They planned around it. They didn't stumble into your heart and break it carelessly. They walked in, saw your kindness, your patience, your loyalty, and thought, I can use this. That isn't carelessness. That's predatory behavior disguised as charm. And the moment you stop pretending it wasn't, you reclaim every piece of your stolen power. They don't deserve your doubt, you deserve closure. Every time you excuse them with, maybe they didn't mean it, you invalidate your own pain. You rewrite your own history. You become complicit in your own gaslighting. But here's the truth. The pain didn't lie. The pattern didn't lie. Your goodness didn't leave, they did. And now clarity is your closure, not their apology. Not their excuses, just the truth and the strength to live by it. So stop calling it a mistake if it was a decision. Stop calling it confusion if it was a strategy. Stop calling it love if it came with conditions. You owe yourself truth without distortion. That's how healing begins, because you didn't get hurt by accident. You got hurt because someone made a choice and you kept giving them chances. Not anymore. This is where the pattern ends. This is where your story changes. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them another conversation. You don't owe them another chance to distort your truth. What you do owe is to yourself, your sanity, your peace, your right to walk away from anything that once convinced you, to betray your own soul. You owe yourself everything you kept giving away to people who never knew what to do with it. And you owe them nothing, not even an explanation. People will say, "At least hear them out. Maybe it's time to reconcile. You're being too harsh." But no, you're not being harsh. You're being clear, and clarity to those used to chaos feels like cruelty. It looks like detachment to them, but in truth it is freedom. They were used to controlling you, used to twisting your softness into something they could exploit. They never respected it, they abused it. But that version of you is gone, because now you know your healing doesn't need approval, your peace doesn't need permission, and your boundaries don't require validation from the very people they're designed to protect you from. Your silence is a full sentence. You don't need to respond to that message. You don't need to reopen that chapter. You don't need to meet them halfway when they never took a single step toward you. Your silence speaks volumes. It says everything they refuse to hear back. When you were screaming in pain, it isn't pettiness. It's power. It's closure. And closure means the story ends here. No sequel. You don't heal by re-explaining your pain. They heard you the first time, and they didn't care. They saw the tears. They watched the breakdowns. They witnessed your spirit unravel, and they continued anyway. So what makes you think they deserve a recap now? You don't need them to understand. You need you to understand that staying in. This cycle is self-betrayal, and you've outgrown that version of yourself, the one who explained, who justified, who begged, who hoped. You're done teaching people how to treat you. You're done translating your humanity into a language they never intended to learn. Your loyalty was misplaced, but now it pivots. You redirect it to yourself. You protect your energy the way you once protected their reputation. You defend your peace the way you once defended their potential. And no, that doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise. It makes you unshakable. It makes you someone who finally understands that not everyone deserves access to the healed version of you. Just because you've healed doesn't mean they've changed. They may circle back with tears, with apologies, with grand words of regret, but tears are not repentance. Words are not evidence. Time is not transformation. And forgiveness does not mean reunion. It means release. You can heal and still block. You can forgive and still walk away. You can move on and never look back. You owe them nothing, but you owe yourself everything, all that you sacrificed while waiting for them to become who they pretended to be. Self-respect is the final stage of healing. You've cried enough. You've explained enough. You've tolerated enough. Now, you protect your mind like a fortress. Guard your energy like sacred ground and honor your intuition like gospel. Because the healed version of you, they don't get to meet them. Not after what they did to the broken one. No more apology for being unavailable to chaos. From here forward, you don't apologize for boundaries. You don't apologize for being harder to access. You don't apologize for walking away quietly, without spectacle. You don't carry guilt for choosing silence over closure. You don't carry shame for choosing detachment over chaos. You don't carry regret for burning bridges that were built on your destruction. You don't owe them clarity. You owe yourself consistency. This is where it ends and where you begin again. This isn't just the conclusion of an old story. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one where you no longer make space for people who damage with intent and apologize with manipulation. You're no longer loyal to old wounds. You no longer feel the need to explain why you walked away from the fire they kept lighting. You're simply gone, healed, awake, and finally unavailable, because you owe them nothing. But you owe yourself everything. They didn't break you by accident. They did it because they thought you'd never wake up. They miscalculated. They thought you'd crawl back. They thought you'd always need them, that you'd be too soft, too loyal, too afraid to walk away. But you're done. Done explaining. Done doubting yourself. Done handing out grace to people who only ever showed you patterns, not change. This is where the cycle ends, not with a scream, not with a collapse, but with a silence so deep it echoes. For years, because you don't rise by fixing them. You rise by refusing to ever let them break you again. So don't give them a second chance. They didn't make a mistake. They made a decision. And now it's your turn to make one. Choose yourself every time, without apology. And if these words hit home, share them. Because someone out there is just one reminder away from breaking free, too. Subscribe for unapologetic truths, powerful awakenings, and the kind of emotional intelligence they never wanted you to master. You've outgrown who you were. Welcome to who you really are. If this message resonates with you, drop a comment below. What's one boundary you wish you had set earlier in your life? Or explore our playlist, because protecting your peace isn't weakness, it's wisdom.